in. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening. I guess there are a number of people that I can see who are joining in from Europe as well, just knowing some of the names. Once again, a warm welcome to this webinar, Getting to Pull at Enterprise Scale by David Anderson, brought to you today by Lean Kanban University and Swift Kanban from Digitech. Let's get started. Let me go ahead and go through the agenda. So we'll start with some introductions and then give you a quick overview of Swift Kanban and Digitech. And then I will hand over the mic to David for going through his presentation on getting to pull at enterprise scale. And then hopefully we will have a good spirited Q&A session, and I encourage you all to stay back and ask any questions that you have of David. Just some quick housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded, and the slides and the recording will be made available after the webinar. We will take the questions via the questions box that you will see on the right side of your screen in that panel. Feel free to ask the question at any time, and we'll make sure to take in all the questions that get asked as long as we don't overshoot the time too much. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce to those of you who may still not know David Anderson. Unlikely that that happens, but of course David is chairman of Lean Kanban Inc. My name is Mahesh Singh. I'm Senior Vice President and Head of Marketing at Digitech. David really needs no introduction, but just again a quick look at some of his key achievements. He's of course the originator of the Kanban method and enterprise services planning. It's the latest and some of the most extensive body of work that he has undertaken in the Kanban in the last couple of years. And of course with Kanban method since early 2000s or mid 2000s. He's been the pioneer of the use of Kanban systems for improved services delivery in creative and knowledge work business. Of course, he's the author of several books, including a Kanban Successful Evolutionary Change for Your Technology Business, which is considered by so many people as the Bible for anyone using Kanban in knowledge work. And of course, he's a management trainer and consultant, a very popular speaker and presenter. Let me give you just a very quick overview of Digitech and Swift Kanban, and I will then get out of the way here. We are a pioneer in a variety of web-based collaborative products and solutions, headquartered out of Cupertino, California, right in the backyard here with Apple. We have over 700,000 users in countries all over the world using various products that we have. Our products cover Lean, Kanban, Agile, Application Lifecycle Management, and Project Portfolio Management. And Swift Kanban, of course, is our sort of flagship product in the Lean Kanban arena. Swift Kanban is today being used. We launched it in 2011, and it's really being used across a wide variety of functions, including, of course, typically IT and software development, non-tech functions like marketing and legal, procurement, healthcare, just again a very wide range of functions in terms of the use of Swift Kanban for business purposes. And then of course it also gets used by a lot of people for personal Kanban purposes, and we even have a planning a Thanksgiving party. Of course we completed that, and you could probably still use that template for planning a Christmas party. But we have a variety of users who use us for personal Kanban as well. And today I think Swift Kanban is considered to be a leading tool for any types of Kanban applications, both for business as well as for personal reasons, so personal purposes. One of the key things that we are really known for is our analytics, and we really do a very good job in terms of implementing some of the key aspects of the Kanban method and being able to help you with measuring your team's performance and looking at the amount of value that you deliver to your customers, and really help you analyze and understand your overall flow of work through a variety of different functions that you might use it for. What I'm excited also to share with you is, of course, the fact that we have been doing a number of things with David in enterprise services planning, and we have our own module called Swift ESP. Enterprise services planning can be considered to be really the Kanban at scale, Kanban at the enterprise level, and David has been speaking about it, training people on it, and working with us to build some of the features that we have now in terms of enterprise services planning over the last probably nearly 2 years. And so today we have a strong support for enterprise services planning with capabilities like demand and capacity planning, forecasting, being able to forecast your capability in terms of when you can deliver something based on the work that has already been done by your team. And you need very little data, maybe even just 3 months of data to be able to forecast and give really accurate predictions about what your system can do or what your team can do based on that data. We have things like cost of delay and the capability for you to define your cost of delay function and be able to predict how much it will cost if you were to get delayed in starting a new initiative or a new project. And then we do a lot of other very interesting analytics around enterprise services planning, such as liquidity and volatility forecasting as well. And along with that, we have released the capability for doing risk assessment and demand shaping based on your risk profiles of different work that you're considering undertaking, and some of that will be potentially shown today in the webinar today. And just finish off with a quick look at some of the key customers that we have, and as you can probably tell, we have some very well-known brands and customers using our products, and we have all sizes of teams using Swift Kanban. So with that, let me just again remind you that please feel free to ask questions anytime during the webinar, and we'll take them up at the end of the session. And with that, let me go ahead and hand over the presentation to David.
Thank you, Mahesh. Let me just bring up the application. Okay, Mahesh, can you now see my presentation?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so welcome everyone in North America and Europe joining us for the second session. While you were sleeping, I was doing an earlier version of this for the Asian market, and we have learned from that experience. So this will be a slightly abridged presentation so that we have some more time for the demo of the demand shaping features and for the Q&A at the end. So true business agility, getting to pull at enterprise scale. Why is this important? Why is it interesting? Well, really, Kanban is now ubiquitous. People are using it for personal Kanban. They're using it with their kids. They're doing it with fridge magnets in the kitchen at home. They're doing it with pin boards in their garage. They're bringing the idea into the office. They're doing personal Kanban in their cubicle. They're collaborating with their immediate colleagues and building team Kanban boards. They have departmental level boards. We have service delivery workflow boards, portfolio boards, upstream Kanban boards for product management. We've seen Kanban in law firms, in HR departments, in advertising agencies, in web agencies, in market research companies. We've seen it in IT operations, we've seen it for product development, and we've seen it implemented in product and business units at companies up to a scale of more than 5,000 people. We've seen it on all continents in the world apart from Antarctica, and we run our conference series and we have presentations pretty much in every major language. We have the Kanban book translated into 10 languages. The concept is ubiquitous, where 11 years ago people were telling me, oh, you can't use Kanban, it's a factory thing, you can't use it for knowledge work, you can't use it for software development, it's just wrong. And we have to now say that we have won this battle for acceptance. It's time to declare victory. Kanban is a good idea and nobody argues with that anymore. In China, there are 3 companies with very large-scale implementations: Huawei, the telecoms and electronics, consumer electronics brand, more than 5,000 people across more than 10 business units using the Swift Kanban software. Ping An, which is an insurance company and bank, with more than 5,000 people, mostly physical boards. So product level and portfolio level implementations, and CMB China Merchants Bank, which has more than 3,000 people, again with mostly physical boards. These implementations are not unique to Asia. We've seen big implementations at Ericsson, Scania, Siemens, Rolls-Royce, BBVA, which is a Spanish bank, Odigio, which is the world's 2nd largest online travel agent based out of Barcelona, and many others. And the return on investment on these implementations has been huge. The cost of the large-scale implementations in China is equivalent to employing about 3 full-time staff. But the payoff at Huawei has been 10 to 50% productivity improvement with an average of 25% across 5,000 people. It's the equivalent of not hiring 1,250 engineers, and the return on investment on implementing Kanban is measured as greater than 30,000%, or a 300 to 400 times more delivered than they spent to do the implementation. Meanwhile, the theory that Kanban's the start with what you do now method and evolve slowly without much resistance to change is proving to be true. That while there are without doubt failed Kanban implementations, and I've blogged about this in the past, there are 2 types of failure. The failure where you implement something too simple and it stagnates, doesn't get any better, and then the worst failure where you're overly ambitious with too big of a Kanban implementation and the organization chokes on it as you install it and you don't get started. So the failure to install. There are without doubt these failure stories, but where organizations do manage to have an installation, they're not reporting any significant problems. If we compare with some large-scale agile implementations, there are some banks in the United States, there are some of them who might even be my clients now. You know who you are, some of you are on this call, and you know that your company has failed to do large-scale agile implementations 3 or even 4 times over the last decade. And we see other management fads like holacracy producing 40% staff turnover in companies. This is really inflicting very cruel change on organizations. It's inhumane, and that the pain of it asks us to question the value. Meanwhile, we have seen a very tribal and emotional pushback amongst the Agile community who feel that Kanban has no estimates, no planning, no weird rituals, stuff that they hold very dear as superstitious behaviors, and they're unwilling to give those up. And this does create some resistance to adoption of Kanban, and it's definitely created resistance to including good Kanban content in Agile conferences across the United States. The problem with all of this is that it's not really Kanban at all. It's a board on the wall with some sticky notes. And yes, it's helping people, and yes, they all think they're doing Kanban. Torbjörn Gillebring in Sweden referred to it as hipster Kanban perhaps 5 years ago already. And it's not Kanban because there are no WIP limits, no end-to-end pool system. If we compare with proper Kanban, the first one at Microsoft in their IT department in 2005, 230% productivity improvement, 91% reduction in the average lead time, on-time performance up from 0 to 98% in a time frame of 15 months, and the cost was almost nothing, no coaching fees, no consultants, no training. 2 additional team members were added as full-time employees in the middle of the transformation. And in total a 230% productivity improvement, 150% achieved without adding any additional staff. Then a couple of years later, there was a large and impressive implementation at Hewlett-Packard's printer division in Boise, Idaho. In total, they produced a 700% or 8 times productivity improvement. They attributed half of that directly to the Kanban implementation and the rest of it to a number of other lean improvements. They dropped the lead time to develop firmware for new laser printers from 21 months to 3.5 months. They went on 4.5-day working week, and all of this was achieved in less than 1 year. It cost almost nothing, no coaches, no training, no consultants, just some managers who came to a conference, saw a presentation from me and a presentation from Don Reinertson, went home, implemented what they'd learned. So proper Kanban produces vastly better results than these results we're seeing reported from firms like Huawei, and we've seen similar implementations in companies like Ericsson in Europe. That's because they're failing to implement end-to-end pool. They're failing to get to pool at an enterprise scale, and these partial implementations, perhaps of per-person WIP limits, are often referred to as proto-Kanban. They're almost but not quite real Kanban. Now we recognize 6 different types of proto-Kanban. This is a small team Kanban. It's probably very localized. It's part of a longer workflow. And these proto-Kanban implementations, they relieve the individuals of overburdening. They help us with quality, but they don't provide end-to-end pool. They don't provide dramatically shorter lead times or dramatic improvements in the productivity. This longer workflow example here illustrates the per-person WIP limit concept. Here we're using avatars to limit the WIP for individuals to 3 people. The interesting thing about a design like this is that it doesn't limit the WIP in the system. The customer's experience is that lead times are still long and still very unpredictable because of the non-deterministic nature of the time spent queuing. That the P ticket, the N ticket, the B ticket, the F ticket, the G, the K ticket on this board, they could sit there for months potentially. So these per-person WIP limits, and this is a feature that the Swift Kanban software does support. We recognize proto-Kanban as a good thing. It's a way to get started. It's just not where you should finish. And then we have these. The first time I saw boards like this in any large scale was visiting Ericsson about 5 years ago in various offices in Europe. And my frustration was that they were convinced this was real Kanban. We now refer to this as aggregated team Kanban. It's like taking team Kanban boards and placing them side by side because they're adjacent in a longer workflow. But we also know these as the infinite done queue boards. because they're not end-to-end pool, they're small localized Kanban, team Kanbans, which are decoupled from each other. And the consequence of a board like this is development could be running at its own speed much faster than testing, and the WIP in the system is not controlled, it's not limited, and the customer experience will be long lead times and a lack of predictability. So proto-Kanban is about transparency, relief from overburdening, reduced multitasking. Quality improves as a consequence of these things. Meanwhile, people are engaged emotionally, the boards are visual, they can see formerly invisible work and workflows, there's a lot more collaboration, there's greater empathy amongst the players within the workflow and potentially with the customers if they can also see the board. So, and then in addition to that, we're seeing 10 to 50% productivity improvements at almost zero cost. So proto-Kanban's a great thing, except that companies who only get this far are leaving perhaps 8 to 16 times greater improvement on the table. They are failing to realize the true value and opportunity of adopting Kanban. Excuse me while I sip my tea. Okay, so proto-Kanban really represents minor league implementation. If you want to play in the big league, you have to get to enterprise end-to-end pool. And we might ask, why do we care? Well, we care about the improved productivity. And we might ask, why are people struggling to get there? What is causing them to get stuck at this proto-Kanban level? Well, first of all, they might think they're done. We implemented Kanban, we put a board on the wall, we modeled our workflow, we've added some WIP limits, productivity's up by 40%. Kanban obviously worked, cost us very little money, and we've got improvement. So for those people, we've developed something called the Kanban Litmus test, which is designed to help them assess, are they there yet? Have they arrived in Kanban land? Have managers changed their behavior? Has the customer interface changed? Has the customer contract changed? Has the service delivery business model changed since you believe you implemented Kanban? So, have managers changed their behavior? Have they switched to focus of managing work, focusing on the flow of the work, forecasting probabilistically, deferring commitment, making promises based on a probabilistic understanding of things, embracing risk and uncertainty, focusing on due date performance against SLAs? Are they managing the work, or are they still managing the people? Are they focused on assigning work to individuals and utilization levels? Are they building brittle deterministic plans, making early commitment and making promises to customers which they then break later? Is there a lack of regard and respect for risk and uncertainty in their environment? If managers are still behaving the same way, you probably haven't adopted Kanban yet. Has your customer interface changed? Is it the same old planning meetings, the same old on the same old schedule? Or have you adopted Kanban system replenishment meetings? Are the customers present at your replenishment meetings? If customers aren't present and you're not asking them, what do you want next? If the act of commitment isn't happening in the replenishment meeting, you're probably not doing Kanban yet. And replenishment meetings should be very low overhead. You should be capable of doing them much more frequently than your existing planning meetings. So has the cadence of the meeting changed? Are you doing it much more frequently than before? Has your customer contract changed? Are you still making commitments in the same way? Or is the promise that you make to your customer changed? Are you still making deterministic plans, promising very precise scope and schedule, and hedging with contingency by overestimating size, complexity, or duration, or padding with significant time buffers? Are you working probabilistically? Are you studying historical data? Are you aggregating the risk of that uncertainty using service level agreements and a new style of contract with your customer? If not, if you're still doing things the old way, you're probably not doing Kanban yet. And then finally, has your service delivery business model changed? Are you understanding the risks that you have in the work, and are you implementing classes of service based on the urgency and other risks in order to treat work differently according to its class of risk? Or are you still treating everything homogeneously from a risk perspective? If you're not analyzing risks and you're not implementing classes of service to handle the risks differently, then you almost certainly haven't implemented Kanban yet. In fact, if you can't tell me the difference between a work item type and a class of service, then you're not doing Kanban yet. Well, one of the real challenges of implementing Kanban at the enterprise scale is dealing with irrefutable demand. So many organizations that we meet, their problem is described as everything that comes to us is already committed. There's no concept of pushing back. We can't refute demand. We can't deny it. That we can't pull. Things are just pushed onto us. And it's worth analyzing why this happens. That it's particularly true of shared services inside large organizations, but it's really true, or potentially true, of any situation where it's not directly externally customer facing. Right, so it feels like push, it feels like the work is inevitable, because so much of the demand is internally spawned based on existing commitments that were made elsewhere by someone else to some customer that you may not even know, understand, or if you're getting to pull, you've generally started with an externally customer-facing service, and that is the assumption in our Kanban system design training when we're working on the static exercises, the system thinking approach to implementing Kanban. You're asked to describe who is the customer, what do they ask you for, and if you're going to design a system with proper WIP limits and classes of service, it is necessary to understand who the customer is, what they're asking for, and what the business risks and expectations are that are associated with work of different types. That there is a need to insert a strong definition of ready. We're not willing to commit to something unless it meets that definition. What are the causes of irrefutable demand? We've already committed to it. This is very common in large organizations. Sometimes it's bad behavior. Salespeople commit to customers, or executives commit on deadlines. Simply the boss wants it. It's his idea. It's his baby. He doesn't care whether it's a good idea or not. But there are other perfectly legitimate reasons for irrefutable demand. It's legal or regulatory, perhaps. It's table stakes for a particular customer or market niche. If we don't build this, people aren't going to buy it at all. So it's a binary decision. We're in this business or we're not in the business. And if we're in, then this demand is irrefutable. Or it's mission critical. You can't refute high severity production defects, for example. If the company website is down, you have to fix it. You have to bring it back up. So there are legitimate reasons for irrefutable demand. And when we discover this in a static workshop, we help people understand the nature of unplanned and irrefutable work that's pushed on them, and how to hedge the risk of it by using planned, intangible class of service, work that's important but not urgent, that can be delayed, and to create enough capacity for that to hedge the risk of the arrival of the unplanned work, to aggregate services and teams together into larger departments, larger Kanban boards, so that you have enough capacity to be able to allocate low risk, low urgency work as a hedge against the arrival of high urgency, irrefutable demand. So we have tactics for coping with it. Getting to enterprise level pool requires that we have the capability to refute some of the demand. We need to be able to balance our capability to supply against the rate of demand that we're seeing. And we need to recognize that demand can be shaped. Even if it is irrefutable, can we schedule it? Can we smooth out the arrival of it? Can we delay it in some way? Can we sequence the work in some order? And perhaps work we believe is irrefutable, perhaps it's not as irrefutable as we think. So asking the question, is all the irrefutable demand really as irrefutable as we think? It is a valuable way forward. It's a higher maturity behavior, but it's required to get to enterprise level pool. Can we use policy to shape demand? For example, can we sacrifice fidelity in order to avoid overburdening a shared service? If our user interface design team is a shared service, does every single screen design have to go to them? Or can we have policy that identifies high-risk screens in our system, which should be designed by the professionals, and low-risk screens which can be designed by any developer or business analyst? In which case we're bifurcating the demand. Some of it's going to the professional shared service and some of it is avoiding it. This way we can help to balance out the demand against the capability to supply, that we can smooth demand through better understanding. By understanding business risks such as cost of delay, this enables us to schedule work into the future, or by understanding other risks such as the likelihood the requirements will change and we'll need to rework something. Well, if that's a high risk, we should defer until later. We should sequence that work later within a batch, for example, a project. We should do the low-risk work first so that we have more time to feel comfortable about the requirements. So we can sequence, we can schedule, we can use policy to bifurcate demand, we can shape demand based on a solid understanding of the risks involved in the items. That you really have more management options than you think. The dumb-ass approach to dealing with irrefutable demand is to ask for more capacity, more resources, more people, more money, and this is how businesses get very bloated. And they fail to deal with the overburdening, they fail to deal with the imbalance in the work flowing in their organization, and they're stuck in a vicious cycle of increasing capacity. Oh, we're overburdened again, increase capacity some more. They're failing to deal with the imbalances in their network of service delivery, their network of Kanban systems. So we need them to use a holistic approach. It's a fair criticism, perhaps, that I have not paid much attention to dealing with dependencies and dealing with this problem of irrefutable demand, because I worked on the assumption that if you created an operations review, you would discover these problems for yourself and fix them for yourself. That the simple concept of you identify all the services in your organization, You build a Kanban system for each service using the static method workshop to design it. And then you implement an operations review to manage the interdependencies between your different Kanban systems, and magic happens. But we've learned in the last 2 years that we need to be a lot more prescriptive about how to manage dependency, how to manage irrefutable demand. The training materials at Lean Kanban University have been updated significantly, and we've introduced new and additional training to help people implement Kanban at large scale. So here's a list of potential strategies for dealing with irrefutable demand. Deferring commitment negotiated and agreed with the customer because they're not ready yet, that you have a strong definition of ready and you can demonstrate they're not ready. Using classes of service to maximize the flow of value, build flexibility to handle variation in work. Could we delay something but give it a higher class of service later? Or can we start something early and give it a low class of service? These are options that help us smooth out demand. Operations review with the right cadence to help us balance demand, to see where there are large accumulations of delayed work because of dependencies. The use of staff liquidity, the idea that we have larger Kanban boards with bigger teams, some of which have multi-skilled or generalist or T-shaped people working in them that can be moved around very flexibly. Being able to identify constraints or bottlenecks and use policy to bifurcate demand around them, to sacrifice fidelity in order to balance work going through bottlenecks, to improve the quality of the work going to a bottleneck, exploiting it better by having a stronger definition of ready before we send work to it. Using capacity allocation to balance planned versus unplanned work and urgent versus not urgent work. Of course, reducing the work in progress and managing flow means that we do things faster and more predictably, and that makes it easier for us to defer commitment until later, and it gives us more flexibility in how we schedule work. The real challenge with end-to-end pool, with the proper use of WIP limits, is it creates this basic stress on an organization that we must be able to answer the question, what should we work on now, what should wait until later, and what shouldn't we do at all. This concept is known as triage, separating things into 3 buckets, the now, later, and not at all. And it creates a stress on an organization that's been used to pushing everything and hoping for the best. So if you haven't developed a strong triage discipline, then you almost certainly won't be capable of achieving end-to-end pool. Now, I find in software development organizations, they often understand the use of triage for bug fixing because they realize they can't fix all of the bugs that they have in their software. They have to separate them into fix now, prior to the release, fix later, after the release with various dot releases and patches, or don't fix at all. Well, why not take that triage capability that you have for bugs and apply it to everything, apply it to all types of demand so that you can shape demand accordingly. So I'm going to hand over to Mahesh in just a moment to demo how the product works. But this abstract picture is showing you 5 different risk dimensions. Mahesh will show you some specific examples. And the concept of a bug bar is modeled here as a demand shaping threshold, that we have set some threshold on each of the risk dimensions, and if an item has a risk which is Mahesh, something is going wrong with my, can you still see this?
Yes, I can see it now, David. There's some problem
okay,
with, yeah.
The software was doing something weird, the GoToWebinar. If we have a work item that plots to the outside of this line, we would say it's definitely in, we should definitely do it. If it plots to the inside, it's definitely out, we're not doing it. And if it spans the threshold, then we should talk about it. So we have 3 clear buckets: definitely do it, talk about it and decide when to do it, versus don't do it at all. Now the software implements this threshold in both directions. You can have either an internal exclusion zone or, like this, an external exclusion zone. And now with this style, we wouldn't do the high-risk item plotted to the outside. We would do the low-risk item in the middle, and something that straddled it, we would still talk about it. So the first strategy I showed you would be typical for bug handling, that we want to fix the high-risk bugs. And this second strategy might be more for product management, where we're choosing to implement lower risk features. So the software is capable of both of these options, and I'm going to hand over now to Mahesh, who will demo this in the software. This is how we deal with exceptionally large backlogs at very low cost and enable very quick decision making at replenishment meetings.
Thanks, David. All the terms that you're using, large backlogs and irrefutable demand, are something that, as a product company, we deal with all the time. And so we have struggled with this ourselves. And so this is something that really, rings true for us. The risk assessment and the demand shaping capabilities really is a very fast and efficient way for triaging large backlogs. And we, as a product company, even as a small company, we deal with large backlogs. We've seen a lot of our customers, large organizations, trying to figure out what is the right, work that they should take up, what next portfolio initiative they should take up, and they really struggle with this. We have been in the business of portfolio management for years, and portfolio management solutions, traditional portfolio management solutions, would provide you all kinds of complex, financial calculations and approaches to figure out what to take up next. And it would just become very hard for them to really be able to work with it. And people struggle with these large backlogs or large sets of initiatives to deal with. And what we have here is really an elegant solution for it that makes it very easy for teams to get together and define sort of the base dimensions or criteria for their analysis of new work, and then be able to select the right initiatives or right portfolio initiatives to work on without having to struggle through a lot of complex calculations. So here is a simple example that I'm showing you here of different things that one might be considering taking up. And what we do here is provide you the ability to define the framework in which you want to basically analyze your backlog and look at what are some of the factors that affect you, both internal factors as well as external factors. So here we have something set up that we call risk framework, where we have factors such as technology or competition or market, etc. And this can be very easily set up. And while we provide a number of dimensions out of the box, you can set up your own dimensions and their own values and easily set up this risk framework. And once you've set up the framework, then as I was showing you here on the Kanban board, depending on the current items that are sitting in your backlog, and of course here we have items that are currently on the port itself, but you can easily understand what you can do with the same items on the backlog, that you can look at the risk profile of any particular project portfolio and see on a periodic basis what is the profile, what is the risk profile for that item, what is, for example, the cost of delay. Is it something that is going to affect you extensively, or is it something that is selective discretion? What is the legal implications of doing something? Variety of different factors that you can consider. So you can very easily, in a group setting, come to agreement quickly on what is the current risk profile of each of these project initiatives that you're looking at. So once you define the framework, you define on an ongoing basis the risk profile of the different items that you have under consideration. Then on a replenishment meeting or on other planning events that you have, where you're defining your strategy for what to select next, what you simply do is what we call risk analysis or demand shaping, where you can look at all of the work that is currently sitting with you and where you need to select, and based on the risk profile that has been defined for them, you can easily say, okay, show me those initiatives or those projects that meet a specific profile, that just exactly like David was showing you on the slides, and based on what you set as your appetite for being able to take up the next set of work in terms of the filter that you define here, you can look at the combination of initiatives that either meet all of those risk values, or some of them. And as you can see here, we show you values that show, items that show all the values that are inside of the risk profile that you set up, or some that meet 6 of those 7 values and 5 of those 7 values, and depending on your business context and depending on what you're able to take up, you can choose to select one or more and move them to your Kanban board and actually take it up for execution. So using a very simple set of capabilities around defining a risk framework and then filtering your work, being able to filter the work based on that profile that you defined for each of the items on your backlog, you can easily take very complex decisions very easily using this capability. So there is a lot more to this, but again, very simple to use and very easy to implement the concept that David just talked about. David, anything you'd like to add?
I think the key here is that it moves the decision making to a policy level where the demand threshold that you've set on the risk framework is essentially policy for what should be in versus what should be out. So rather than making individual decisions about individual items in your backlog, you can now group them into large collections based in a policy sense. And the software here sorts them into these nice buckets of how many of the criteria are being met. So you could scroll down here and you could say everything that meets 4 values or above, we're going to do it, and everything below that, we're not going to do it. So you can make decisions about large quantities of things in your backlog, what's going to be in your plan for a release or being pulled onto your Kanban board at this meeting. That can be decided very quickly, and there's an actual business explanation. It's a defensible decision because it meets with agreed risk management policies for the business, reducing what could be a very long and stressful meeting, perhaps only to 10 or 15 minutes, and everybody leaves with a consensus agreement on why we chose the items that we chose.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So if we could go back to the presentation, Mahesh, if you can give me back control.
There you go, David.
I'll quickly finish this with our assessment of the 7 reasons on what's preventing people getting to pool. Well, they often don't start with a customer-facing service. It's perhaps unreasonable for us to expect people always to start with customer-facing services. But if you're in a large organization and you want Kanban to spread, it is so much better if you start with customer-facing services where you can refute demand, that you can schedule and sequence demand more easily. You can have proper replenishment meetings with customers present, because it demonstrates the true power of Kanban. It demonstrates how to do it properly, and then you start spreading it internally. So starting on the edge with customer-facing services is a much better strategy. We meet large organizations where, from a corporate governance perspective, the delivery group, the product group, the IT services group, they're just order takers. They aren't allowed to influence the what, the when, the why, and therefore work is pushed onto them. There's no stewardship. They have no input, no collaboration. And that low trust situation needs to be broken down and replaced with a higher trust. And it requires multiple steps. Improving what you do, improving the reliability, the predictability, the speed of service delivery is a good way to start rebuilding trust, and then encouraging a greater level of transparency, encouraging the adoption of risk profiling is a way forward. We also see businesses where they're using legacy tooling, tracking tools, ticketing systems, ALM products, which are not designed for Kanban. They don't have proper WIP limits, they don't implement pool properly, they don't have the right metrics, and most of all, they're not architected from the ground up for evolutionary change and continuous improvement. So organizations that fail to select a proper Kanban tool like Swift Kanban, they often get stuck, and the legacy tooling becomes an impediment. And their argument is, oh, we've invested so much in this tool, but they're actually leaving perhaps 8 to 16 times more improvement, hundreds of % in productivity. They're leaving it on the table because they have an emotional attachment to a tool that they're spending perhaps $15 per month per user. So for the cost of 3 cups of coffee for staff members, they're leaving hundreds of % improvement, multiples of productivity improvement on the table. It's really very stupid emotional decision making. That if you really want to get to enterprise pool and realize the 700% productivity gains that we've seen at companies like Hewlett-Packard, I saw a similar one at a mortgage bank in Pennsylvania last week. If you want to achieve those kind of results, you need to get off the legacy tools and invest in proper Kanban tools like Swift Kanban. A lack of understanding of business risks, so we get irrational decision making, we get a lot of emotion, we get a failure to achieve consensus. Lack of mathematical literacy, this is particularly a problem in the United States, which has probably the worst mathematical education of the developed world. People are afraid of math in the United States, and as a consequence, this limits their ability to believe in the data and to understand the risks they're managing and when to schedule things and in what sequence to do things. That without a trust in mathematics, you can't trust when to schedule something. And I'm not suggesting that everyone in your business needs to go back to school, but you need to have some people in the organization who are mathematically literate in statistics and understand probability distribution functions. Lack of skills in negotiating or forming business agreements. geeks are always at a disadvantage in a planning meeting with business people, because the business people went to business school, they did classes in negotiation, they negotiate business deals for a living, and when they're working with IT people, it's a negotiation. So we actually train Kanban coaches and people who come through the coaching workshop on how to negotiate the implementation of Kanban systems and how to do it in a way where the business people believe that they've won the negotiation, and yet the delivery side gets what it needs in order to be able to improve its performance, its productivity, its capability to make end-to-end pool work for them. Then finally, a lack of confidence in planning and scheduling at any form of scale, mainly because of dependencies. And recently we've implemented extended training on managing dependencies and the use of dynamic reservation systems to improve the confidence that capacity will be available when you need it, so that people can make pool decisions and commitments at the edge, knowing that the work may create cascading requests across a network of internal services, and yet the overall delivery will still be predictable within some given range. So the solutions are out there. If you're struggling to get to pool at enterprise scale and you like the idea of producing 8 to 16 times more productivity improvement than you've already achieved with your proto-Kanban, come and ask us. We can help you. We have this training. The tooling is available. We can train the managers. We can train the coaches. We can provide you with the skills to get to pool at enterprise scale. This isn't fairy tale. That there are real case studies dating back more than 10 years where companies achieved really dramatic improvements, and the return on investment is huge, because the cost of doing this, the cost of getting to full pool is certainly more expensive than implementing proto-Kanban, but the payoff is huge, multiples in terms of productivity improvement, dramatic reductions in lead time, dramatic improvements in predictability. It is revolutionizing for businesses. It will change your competitiveness. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Mahesh for the Q&A.
Thanks, David. Great presentation, and really sort of puts in perspective what organizations sometimes do because of revenue pressure. I've seen this happen so many times that because of that, like you said, CEOs and salespeople and other folks in an organization make bad decisions just because there is short-term revenue pressure, and they make commitments that they're then unable to, or they struggle to keep with clients, and at the same time, of course, they struggle to deliver services and products to their other customers. So a number of questions have come in here. So let me start with some of the early ones. One of the questions that came in, David, was that early on in your presentation you were sharing some statistics around different companies. I think Microsoft was one of them. And the question is that the stats that you're sharing, are they based on product-focused Kanban implementations or project-focused? And the person who asked the question said that I'm struggling to convince people that longer-term change assumes that you change the organization from project-based to product-based, which is sort of the basis of agile and lean thinking, and that the end-to-end that David you were referring to isn't possible unless you manage. It isn't possible if you manage project-based Kanban boards.
So when we're referring to productivity metrics, we're usually reporting the number of work items completed. And whether it's a project or some service delivery, or product-based concept, the demand still comes in some unit of work, whether it's a user story or a feature or an epic or a change request. There is a concept of a work item type, and then individual requests are individual work items. So if we say that the productivity improved 200%, we mean that the work item delivery rate increased by 3 times. So if that's within a project, you would deliver the project in 1/3 of the time that you'd originally scheduled.
Right, right. There's a second question that came in, I think, in the context of you're talking about Kanban and the kind of change it causes in organizations. Do you still advocate cross-functional teams with end-to-end capability requiring organization, which will require organizational change at some point with Kanban?
We've never recommended organizational change to cross-functional teams. There's a blog post on my website from perhaps a year ago now that the agile agenda of you have to reorganize into cross-functional teams has never been part of the Kanban method. If you have cross-functional teams already, then we'll take it, because Kanban is the start with what you do now method. It's not the reorganize your organization method. And we start with what you do now in the organizational structure you've got, and we improve it. That often I find that people reorganize into cross-functional teams. They're trying to reduce the coordination cost, perhaps improve collaboration, improve communication amongst small teams, but they, for example, sacrifice the architectural integrity of their product. So in the short term, they get a gain of improved, they reduce delays because people are working together better, but in the long term, they have to replace their product because it's poorly architected. So we've never had a cross-functional team agenda. Kanban's entirely agnostic to that.
Got it. So a question related to the definition of the risk framework and the various dimensions that might affect selection of portfolio initiatives. What is a good way to define or come up with the right risk dimensions?
So we have a workshop on that. We actually train that. The risk management class comes with a set of examples, different risk dimensions, different risks you might be managing and how to categorize them. And then there's a workshop which enables organizations to develop customized versions. And eventually we see implementations where they're entirely custom. It usually evolves over time. There was a good presentation at Lean Kanban Central Europe from Maria Torrijos of Odigio, where she described how their risk framework had changed over the course of about 12 months and eventually become an entirely custom framework, where they started with all the examples from our training class, gradually customizing it. The real core of the workshop is to ask the questions, why did we pick something and why didn't we pick something else? And to listen to the narrative of the story on why historical decision making has taken place and identify risks that are being managed. For example, we did this with an online fashion retailer in the United Kingdom, and that workshop revealed that they were managing 2 key risks that they were unaware of. One was supplier confidence and the other one was customer confidence, in addition to the one they were aware of, which was cost of delay. So we built a framework with 7 dimensions, 3 of which were modeling the cost of delay, 2 of which were modeling customer confidence, and the final 2 were modeling supplier confidence. And once you've identified the axes, so for example the order of magnitude of the impact on supplier confidence, and perhaps the shape or the timing of the impact would be the two dimensions, then you talk about how to categorize those, how to create between 2 and 6 categories that will enable you to treat the work with sufficient granularity to manage the risk without it being too precise. We don't want homogeneity, we don't want to treat everything as though it's the same risk, but equally we don't want false precision. We want just enough categories to give us a granularity to make some good quality management decisions. Ideally, we want the categories to represent facts. We want these risk profiles to be factual. Facts are so much easier to agree on. When you ask someone to speculate about, for example, how long will an item take, and we want a very precise answer to that, then we get hundreds of possible answers, even from a small group of people. Where if we ask someone for perhaps 3 categories of it, is it small, medium, or large? Small being we can do it this week, medium we can do it this month, and large it will take more than a month, then it becomes so much easier to form an agreement, to get consensus, and to be able to move forward and make decisions.
Absolutely. The moment you provide a sort of manageable framework for a defined set of responses, then it becomes easier to frame your prioritization much more easily than if you were to leave it completely open. So in that same context, there is a question that in the risk profile, could a category be added for expected velocity points so that it sort of embraces the agile Scrum backlog?
Yes, of course you could. Yeah, of course people could do that. We wouldn't recommend it. It's not something we would teach in class. That we would teach you how to develop your own framework, and it's up to you what you put in there and how you use it. If you want to do something stupid, then go ahead. The thing is that if you need to implement something like that as a transitional step, as a way of making it acceptable to people, because philosophically we want risk frameworks to be modeled on facts, and when someone declares a risk profile for an item, that should be factual. We don't want the use of speculation, because speculation makes it difficult for us to achieve consensus, and it makes it difficult for us to make good quality risk management decisions, because we're not dealing with a fact, we're dealing with something that could be and very likely is false. So if you're building risk profile dimensions on, for example, story points, you're not dealing with facts. And we wouldn't stop you from doing it, but we would recommend that you don't do it.
All right. Another question, how do you let business believe that they've won, as you said towards the end of your presentation?
It's not easy to answer that. I have talked about that on stage. I believe my 2012 keynote speech at the Lean conference in the United States, I talked about it on stage. But the reality is that you have to negotiate in a way where the business believe that design changes to your Kanban system, and when we talk about Kanban system, we don't just mean the board on the wall. We mean all the policies that go with it, the replenishment meeting policies, the definitions of ready, the definitions of poolable at each stage, the WIP limits, the capacity allocation, the risk profile, the risk assessment framework, and so on and so on. All of that is part of the system design. the classes of service you're offering, the policies in the classes of service, and so on. The customer, the stakeholder you're negotiating with, has to believe that elements of the design were their idea. Now, if you've done your work in the static workshop correctly, you should have anticipated most or all of your customers' needs in advance. And the geeky thing to do is to show up and reveal the entire design and show that you've solved all the world's problems. And you shouldn't do that. That you should walk in with the design for the Kanban system and reveal the standard class of service processing, as though you're going to treat everything homogeneously. And this will cause your stakeholder to object, because they recognize their work isn't homogeneous and there are items which need special handling, that need to be expedited or have fixed delivery dates because of external circumstances, regulatory in nature or seasonal in nature, or special events like the World Cup, the Olympics, holidays like Christmas, 4th of July, etc. And you let them object, and you listen to the objection and you make suggestions. You reveal classes of service as suggestions and you let the stakeholder believe it was their idea. Once you've overcome their objection, you shake their hand, you leave the meeting, you go away and you pretend to redesign your Kanban system. And then when you go back or you hold a kickoff meeting with all the stakeholders, you reveal the full design at that point, and each of them believe that they had input in the design and are now vested in it. That's the very quick meta level description of how it's done, and we train this technique in our Kanban coaching workshop. We train the risk assessment and the risk assessment workshops in both the Kanban coaching and the enterprise services planning training.
Okay, great. So for those on the webinar, certainly encourage you to look out for that workshop and perhaps consider attending one of those. Another question that has come in is that the organization that I'm at is not even at a proto-Kanban and has had mixed success with most, I guess, popular agile methods. Does it make sense to focus on achieving proto-Kanban first, or are there other aspects that we should start with?
So Kanban's never been about doing it just for the sake of it, or about some form of religious conversion. You pursue Kanban because you have a context where it's going to help you, and understanding context and applicability of Kanban is also something that we train. We spend quite a lot of time training Kanban coaches to know when it's applicable. But in general, if you find yourself reworking things a lot, if you find yourself constantly reprioritizing, then deferred commitment could probably help you. If you find yourself overburdened and that's affecting quality of the product and staff morale, then limiting WIP could help. So if you have unevenness in your flow and a lack of predictability, what the Japanese call mura, then Kanban systems will help. If you're overburdened, what they call muri, Kanban systems will help. If you're committing too early and then having to rework and change and reprioritize and pull people in different directions, then deferred commitment will help, and therefore a pull system, a Kanban system will help. These are just mechanical reasons. You may also adopt the Kanban method because installing large-scale grand changes has been very brutal and hasn't worked very well in your organization. You use proto-Kanban because you meet with resistance getting to pull at the initial stage. You go with the smallest possible change that can work, and you try to install the correct elements so that people discover for themselves that they want to go to the next stage, that they want to take it up a level. So moving from proto-Kanban to full Kanban implementation often requires some skill from the coach to create the circumstances so that people discover they want it for themselves and they pull the change, they pull the improvement in organizational maturity and the increased depth of the Kanban implementation. And this is stuff that we teach in the Kanban coaching workshop. We train Kanban coaches to know how to create these circumstances so that people discover for themselves that they want more. We use proto-Kanban as a tool.
All right. One last question. I think we are already 15 minutes over time, but this is a question that a lot of people might be looking for an answer for, and that is recommending a good book, David, both on enterprise Kanban as well as enterprise services planning.
So at this point in time, there isn't a book on enterprise services planning or really any of the content that we have in either the ESP classes or the Kanban coaching class. The closest thing to a book on that topic is my Lessons in Agile Management book, because many of these ideas appeared on my blog first, and some of them are not really new ideas. Some of them appeared on my blog 12, 14, 15 years ago already. They've just been collected into one body of knowledge now as enterprise services planning. In general, the existing books on Kanban, my book, Kanban, Successful Evolutionary Change for Your Technology Company, and Mike Burrows' book on Kanban from the Inside, both of these books contain more than enough information to enable you to build enterprise scale Kanban implementations. They contain guidance on operations review. You should be able to build business unit scale Kanban implementations with 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 interdependent Kanban systems with the knowledge that's contained in the existing Kanban books. What the existing books don't help you with is how to overcome the resistance and how to implement the scheduling and sequencing algorithms and the scheduling or reservation systems to help people overcome their discomfort with an emergent complex adaptive system such as the Kanban method. That people who want to be very deterministic and have everything planned in advance have this emotional discomfort moving to something that's much more emergent, trusting the concept that the operations review will over time resolve the issues, that not being prescriptive about what the solutions to the problems are will actually get you there faster. So the existing books don't cover the emotional side of it, and that's a gap that we need to fill. And some of you on this webinar may be aware that we announced I'm taking a sabbatical from the end of June. So the training classes I offer, the Kanban Coaching Masterclass and the Enterprise Services Planning classes, I will not be teaching those beyond the end of June 2017. I'm taking a 15-month sabbatical, and part of the motivation for that sabbatical is that there are at least 2 very solid books that need to be written on Kanban coaching and enterprise services planning. So look out for much better literature in 2018 and beyond.
All right. I was going to say that was the last question, but there is one additional last question that I will go ahead and ask. Again, a lot of people might be interested to hear the answer. Where are you planning to go biking on your sabbatical?
Oh, I haven't thought about it yet. I have not thought about what I'm doing with the time off or where I'm going. I have a house in really a very beautiful part of the world in the very northwest of the United States in Clallam County on the Olympic Peninsula, but it's a little inaccessible, the Olympic National Park, so it's really only for backcountry people, and I might prefer to go somewhere that's got a few more human beings in it. So who knows, you might find me in Indonesia or Malaysia or somewhere in Southeast Asia. Many of you know I used to live in Singapore. But I also like Spain, I like Austria, I like Portugal. I'm sure I'll spend some time in the Alps and some time on the Iberian Peninsula. I'm open to suggestions what to do with
There are
my
some
time
suggestions
off.
for you to come to the Alps, so and I'm sure you considered that. All right. So David, thank you very much for a great webinar. I'm going to just share some contact information for those of you who might need that. But David, thank you
Thank you
very
for
much for a
having me,
great.
Mahesh. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely, and I think I thank all the entire audience for being here, all of you who stayed this late, and especially to all of you who asked some great questions which helped some of the discussions and clarifications around the concepts of enterprise Kanban and pull at enterprise level. If you have any follow-up questions to David, or if you'd like to get a demo of some of the capability we showed you on Swift Kanban, the contact information is shown here on the screen. Like I said at the start, we will send a follow-up email with links to the slides as well as a recording to the webinar. I invite you to take a look at it and get in touch with us if you need to. Thanks to all of you, and have a great rest of the day. David, all the best for your sabbatical. I know it's still some distance away, but in the meantime, all the best for it, and we look forward to continue to working with you.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone who's joined the call today, and I look forward to seeing some of you at our events and classes over the next 6 months.
Wonderful. All right, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.